Imagine a 12-year-old boy sprinting through the desolate streets of a slumbering city, his bare feet striking the cold asphalt with each hurried step. Jamal's heart pounded wildly, not just from the physical exertion but from a deep-seated fear and desperation that drove him forward. His wide, tear-filled eyes were locked on a singular destination, the police station. But what could compel a child to seek help from the police in the dead of night? What had transpired to transform this young boy into a reluctant hero, faced with a decision no child should ever have to make? Jamal's story is a profound journey of love, sacrifice, and bravery. It is a tale that highlights the remarkable strength found in the youngest of hearts and underscores the crucial importance of a unified community. Prepare to be moved by a narrative that will touch your soul, challenge your perspectives, and perhaps even alter the way you view the world around you. As Jamal nears the police station, breathless and resolute, he is unaware that his forthcoming words will trigger a sequence of events that will not only alter his life forever but also inspire an entire community. Are you ready to uncover what drives Jamal on this fateful night? Brace yourself for a story that will keep you riveted, holding on to every word until its profoundly emotional conclusion. As the first rays of sunlight streamed through the curtains of his bedroom, Jamal's eyes fluttered open. He stretched his young body, still craving the comfort of sleep, but he knew he had to get up. His mother, Angela, would be leaving for work soon, and he wanted to spend a few precious moments with her before she went. Entering the kitchen, he was greeted by the aroma of toast and eggs. Angela stood with her back to him, moving about the small kitchen. Even from behind, Jamal could see the weariness in her posture and the slight tremor in her hands as she set the breakfast plate. "Morning, Mom," Jamal said softly, not wanting to startle her. Angela turned, a tired smile spreading across her face. "Good morning, sweetheart. You're up early." Jamal's heart tightened at the sight of his mother. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, and her usually neat hair was hastily tied in a messy ponytail. She looked so exhausted, so worn out. "I wanted to see you before you left," Jamal explained, sliding into a chair at the small kitchen table. Angela's smile widened, but it didn't reach her eyes. "That's very sweet of you, dear. I'm sorry, but I won't be home until late tonight. Double shift, you know?" Jamal nodded, a lump forming in his throat. He was all too familiar with the long hours his mother worked, always striving to make ends meet. "Are you okay, Mom?" he asked, unable to hide the concern in his voice. "You look really tired." Angela waved off his worry dismissively as she placed a plate of eggs and toast in front of him. "Oh, I'm fine, sweetheart. Just a bit sleepy. Nothing a good cup of coffee can't fix." But Jamal wasn't convinced. He watched her hand tremble slightly as she poured her coffee, the way she had to blink hard a few times as if to clear her vision. "Maybe you should take a day off," Jamal suggested cautiously. "You've been working so much lately." Angela's expression softened as she sat down across from him. "Oh, Jamal, you're such a thoughtful boy. But we need the money and the people at the hospital need me. I'll be okay, I promise." Jamal poked at his eggs, his appetite suddenly gone. He knew his mother was trying to reassure him, but he couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The sight of her weary face and trembling hands filled him with a deep, gnawing worry. As Angela gathered her things to leave, Jamal felt a sudden urge to hug her tightly and never let go. Instead, he watched her gather her belongings, his young heart heavy with concern for the woman who had sacrificed so much for him. While they sat at the tiny kitchen table, Jamal's anxious eyes never left his mother's face. He pushed his scrambled eggs around his plate, his mind racing with ways to help her. "So, Mom," Jamal began, trying to sound casual, "how's work been lately? Any interesting patients?" Angela looked up from her toast, blinking as if emerging from a fog. "Oh, work has been busy," she replied, her voice lacking its usual enthusiasm. Same old, same old." Jamal nodded, noting how her gaze seemed unfocused. He pressed on, determined to keep her engaged. "I have a big math test coming up next week. Maybe we could study together this weekend?" Angela's eyes widened slightly as if she had just remembered something. "Oh, right, your test," she rubbed her forehead, looking puzzled. "This weekend I think I'm working, dear." "I'm sorry." Jamal's heart sank. His mother had never forgotten about his tests before. He watched as she took a sip of coffee, her hand shaking slightly as she set the cup down. "It's okay, Mom," he said softly, trying to hide his disappointment. "I understand." Angela attempted a smile, but it looked more like a grimace. "You're such a good boy, Jamal. I promise we'll do something fun soon, okay?" Jamal nodded, but the fluttering in his stomach grew tighter. Her usually warm and comforting words sounded hollow and distant. He noticed how she kept blinking as if struggling to stay awake. Mom, are you sure you're feeling all right? Jamal asked, unable to conceal his concern. Angela straightened up, making a visible effort to appear more alert. Of course, dear. Just a bit tired. It's nothing to worry about. But Jamal could see through her brave face, the dark circles under her eyes, the slump in her shoulders, and the way her smile didn't reach her eyes painted a picture of exhaustion that went beyond mere lack of sleep. As they finished breakfast in silence, Jamal's worry grew. He wished he could do more to ease the burden on his mother's shoulders. For now, all he could do was watch and worry, his young heart heavy with concern for the woman who had given so much and asked for so little in return. As Angela hurried to get ready for work, Jamal watched from his bedroom door. She moved with a slow urgency, fumbling with buttons and knocking things over as she hurried to put on her nurse's uniform. Mom, let me help, he offered, stepping forward to pick up a fallen hairbrush. Angela paused, giving him a tired smile. That's sweet of you, dear, but I've got it. You should be getting ready for school. Jamal hesitated, then spoke again. I could do some chores around the house today, maybe clean the living room or do the laundry? His mother's eyes softened with affection, but she shook her head. No, you focus on your studies. That's the most important thing right now. As Angela turned to the mirror, trying to tame her unruly hair, Jamal noticed the slight tremor in her hands. His stomach twisted with worry. He had never seen his mother like this before, so exhausted and unfocused. Are you sure you're okay to go to work? He asked, his voice low and uncertain. Angela met his gaze in the mirror, forcing a bright smile that didn't reach her eyes. Of course, dear. It's just a long shift, that's all. I'll be fine once I get there and have my second cup of coffee. Jamal nodded, not convinced. He watched his mother gather her things, her movements slow and clumsy. She almost forgot her ID badge, only remembering when Jamal pointed it out. As they headed towards the front door, Jamal's mind raced. He had to do something to help his mother, but she always insisted on handling everything herself, never wanting to burden him with adult responsibilities. Have a good day at school, dear, Angela said, giving him a quick hug. I love you. I love you too, Mom, Jamal replied, hugging her tightly. He didn't want to let go, afraid she might collapse the moment he did. As Angela walked to the car, Jamal stood at the door, his heart heavy with worry. He made a silent promise to himself to find a way to help her, to make sure she rested and took care of herself. He just needed to figure out how. Watching his mother gather her things, Jamal's anxiety grew. Her movements were slow and unsteady, her usual grace replaced by a troubling clumsiness. Just as she was about to leave, Angela stumbled slightly, her hand shooting out to grab the kitchen counter for support. Mom? Jamal shouted, rushing to her side. Are you okay? Angela blinked rapidly as if trying to clear her vision. She forced a smile that looked more like a grimace. I'm fine, dear. Just a bit tired. That's all. Jamal's heart raced as he watched his mother struggle to regain her composure. He had never seen her like this before and it scared him. Maybe you really should stay home today, he suggested, his voice trembling slightly. Oh, sweetheart, I can't do that, Angela replied, patting his cheek gently. As I said, there are patients counting on me. I'll be fine once I get to work and have a coffee. Jamal wanted to argue, to plead with her to rest, but he knew how stubborn his mother could be. She always put others first, even at the expense of her own well-being. As Angela headed for the front door, Jamal followed closely, ready to catch her if she stumbled again. He watched helplessly as she fumbled with her keys, dropping them twice before finally unlocking the door. As her car disappeared down the street, Jamal closed the front door and leaned against it with a heavy sigh. He had never felt so powerless in his life. Sitting in his classroom, Jamal's eyes were fixed on the whiteboard, but his mind was elsewhere. The teacher's voice faded into the background as images of his mother's tired face and unsteady steps filled his thoughts. He couldn't shake the worry that gnawed at him. What if she collapsed at work? What if she had an accident because she was too tired to drive safely? These thoughts spun in Jamal's mind, making it impossible to focus on his math problems. When the lunch bell rang, Jamal barely registered it. He mechanically gathered his books and shuffled toward the cafeteria. His best friend, Marcus, caught up with him in the hallway. Hey man, what's up? Marcus asked cheerfully, but his smile faded as he saw the troubled look on Jamal's face. Jamal shrugged, at a loss for how to express his worries. They grabbed their lunch trays and found a quiet corner to sit. It's my mom, Jamal finally said, pushing his food around with his fork. She's working too much and I'm really worried about her. Marcus listened as Jamal poured out his fears, describing how exhausted Angela had looked that morning, how she had stumbled and seemed so out of it. That sounds serious, Marcus said, frowning with concern. Have you talked to anyone about this? Jamal shook his head. Who would I talk to? It's just me and Mom at home. Marcus thought for a moment. What about a teacher or the school counselor? They might know how to help. The idea had never occurred to Jamal before. He bit his lip, considering. I don't know. What if they think I'm overreacting or call my mom and make her upset? But what if they could actually help? Marcus countered. It's worth a try, right? Your mom's health is important. Jamal nodded slowly, realizing his friend was right. But the thought of talking to an adult about his family issues made him anxious. Who could he trust? Would they truly understand? As lunch ended, Jamal still felt unsure. He knew he needed to do something, but taking that first step seemed daunting. When he got home, the silence was heavy, wrapping around him like a suffocating blanket. He dropped his backpack by the door and stood there for a moment, listening to the ticking of the clock on the wall. Each tick seemed unnaturally loud in the empty space. Mom? He called out, even though he knew she wouldn't be home yet. Her shift wouldn't end for hours. With a sigh, Jamal trudged into the kitchen. He opened the refrigerator, staring blankly at its contents before closing it again. He wasn't hungry. The worry gnawing at him all day seemed to have consumed his appetite. Trying to distract himself, Jamal sat down at the kitchen table with his homework. He opened his math book, determined to focus on the problems, but after reading the same question 3 times without understanding it, he gave up. His mind kept drifting back to his mom. Was she okay? What if she felt dizzy again at work? What if she fainted and no one noticed? Jamal glanced at the clock. 4:30 p.m. Angela wouldn't be home until after 11. The thought of those long hours stretched out before him tightened his chest with anxiety. He got up and paced the living room, trying to calm his racing thoughts. But everywhere he looked, there were reminders of his mother. Her favorite mug on the coffee table, her sweater draped over the back of a chair. Each item seemed to taunt him, highlighting her absence and feeding his fears. As night fell, Jamal's imagination ran wild. He pictured Angela collapsing in a hospital corridor, too exhausted to ask for help. He imagined her falling asleep at the wheel on her way home, her car veering off the road. Each scenario was more terrifying than the last, and Jamal felt helpless to stop them from playing out in his mind. He tried watching TV but couldn't focus on the show. He attempted to read a book, but the words blurred on the page. Even his usual video games couldn't hold his attention. The house felt too big, too empty, and the silence was deafening. By the time night settled in, Jamal sat on the living room sofa, his eyes locked on the front door. The TV hummed in the background, but he wasn't really watching. His phone lay silent on the coffee table, and he kept wishing it would buzz with a message from his mom. But it remained stubbornly quiet. Just as Jamal was about to call the hospital to check on Angela, his phone lit up. His heart leaped as he fumbled to read the message. Working late tonight, dear. Don't stay up waiting. Love you. Jamal's shoulders sagged with a mix of relief and disappointment. At least she was okay, but the thought of her working even longer hours twisted his stomach with worry. He quickly typed back, Okay, Mom. Love you too. Please take care. Jamal tried to follow his mom's advice and go to bed, but sleep eluded him. He tossed and turned, the sheets tangled around his legs as his mind raced with worst-case scenarios. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Angela's exhausted face from that morning, the way she had stumbled in the kitchen. The digital clock on his bedside table seemed to mock him, its red numbers ticking away the hours. As the night wore on, Jamal's concern turned into a gnawing fear. What if something had happened after she sent that message? What if she had fainted at work and no one had noticed? At 3 a.m. Jamal made a decision. If Angela wasn't home by morning, he would go to the police station. They would know what to do, how to find her. It wasn't a great plan, but it was something. Just having a course of action, even a small one, helped ease his frayed nerves a bit. Sleep remained elusive. Jamal lay in bed, eyes wide open, listening for the sound of Angela's car in the garage, the jingle of her keys in the lock. But the house stayed quiet and the night seemed endless. As the first rays of dawn crept through Jamal's window, he heard the faint sound of the front door. His eyes snapped open, his heart racing with relief. Angela was finally home. Jamal lay in bed for a moment, straining to hear his mother's footsteps on the stairs, but the house remained eerily quiet. Frowning, he pushed the covers aside and swung his legs over the edge of the bed. "Mom?" he called out, walking into the hallway. No response came. A shiver ran down Jamal's spine as he made his way to the kitchen. The silence was heavy, almost suffocating. Something was wrong. "Mom?" he called again, his voice trembling slightly. "Are you okay?" When Jamal rounded the corner into the kitchen, his world came to an abrupt halt. There, sprawled on the cold tile floor, was Angela. She lay motionless, and for a split second Jamal was frozen, his mind struggling to process the sight before him. Then, as if a switch had been flipped, he snapped into action. Without even stopping to put on shoes, he bolted out the door. The crisp morning air bit at his skin as he raced down the quiet streets, his bare feet pounding against the pavement. The discomfort was secondary to his single-minded focus. He needed to get help for his mother. Jamal's lungs burned with the effort, his heart pounding so hard he thought it might burst from his chest. Tears clouded his vision, but he blinked furiously, refusing to slow down for even a second. As he sprinted toward the police station, his mind whirled with fear and panic. What if he was too late? What if Angela wasn't okay? He forced himself to concentrate, pushing away the terrifying thoughts, determined to keep running. Jamal burst through the doors of the police station, his chest heaving and his bare feet leaving damp marks on the linoleum floor. The sudden commotion startled the officers inside, who leapt to their feet and rushed toward the frantic boy. "What's wrong, son?" one of the officers asked, his face etched with concern as he knelt down to Jamal's level, catching his breath. Jamal's words tumbled out in a frantic rush. "Please, you have to help my mom. She's on the floor and not moving." The officers exchanged bewildered glances, clearly taken aback by the unexpected plea. Confusion filled the air as they tried to comprehend Jamal's desperate appeal. "Slow down, kid," another officer said gently. "Take a deep breath and tell us what happened." Jamal swallowed hard, his eyes wide with fear and desperation. "My mom, she's on the floor. She's not moving. Please, you have to come." Understanding dawned on the officers' faces as they grasped the gravity of the situation. The first officer placed a reassuring hand on Jamal's shoulder. "We're not going to arrest your mom. We'll certainly help her. Can you show us where she is?" Jamal nodded vigorously, relief flooding through him as he saw the officers spring into action. One grabbed a first aid kit while the other dialed for an ambulance. "Lead the way, son," the first officer said, his voice calm but urgent. Without hesitation, Jamal turned and sprinted back toward his house, the officers close behind him. His heart pounded with a mix of fear and hope, praying it wasn't too late. The small group turned the corner onto Jamal Street, their footsteps echoing in the still morning air. Jamal pointed to his house, his voice choked with emotion. "There. She's in there." The officers quickened their pace, their training taking over as they approached the open front door. Jamal's bare feet slapped against the pavement as he kept his eyes fixed on the entrance of his home, silently willing his mother to be all right. The police car sped through the quiet streets, its lights flashing but siren muted for the calm morning. Jamal sat in the back seat, his small hands tightly clasped, his gaze fixed on the road ahead. The two officers in the front exchanged concerned glances. "What do you think we're walking into, Mike?" the officer in the passenger seat asked quietly. Mike, the driver, shook his head, his grip tight on the steering wheel. "I'm not sure, John. It could be anything from a medical emergency to, well, let's not jump to conclusions." John nodded, his brow furrowed in concern. "That poor kid looks terrified. I hope his mom is okay." In the back seat, Jamal could hear their muted conversation. His heart raced and he squeezed his eyes shut, whispering a silent prayer. "Please God, let mom be okay. Please let us get there in time." The car turned onto Jamal Street and he leaned forward, urgently pointing. "There it is. That's our house." Mike brought the patrol car to a screeching halt in front of the modest house. Before the car had even come to a complete stop, Jamal was already fumbling with the door handle, ready to jump out. "Hold on, kid," Officer John said, turning to face him. "We need to go in first. Stay behind us." Jamal nodded, a mix of fear and impatience in his eyes. As soon as the doors opened, he leaped out of the car, hopping on his toes as he waited for the officers to lead the way. The trio approached the slightly ajar front door. Officer Mike gently pushed it open and called out, "Police! Is anyone here?" As the officers approached Jamal's house, they noticed the door slightly ajar. Their hearts pounded in their chests as they cautiously drew their weapons, signaling to each other to stay alert. Jamal darted ahead, urging them to follow. The officers eased the door open, its creak echoing through the unervingly silent house. Jamal's voice, trembling with fear and hope, called out for his mother. He tried to push past the officers, but Officer John gently held him back. "Stay behind us, Jamal," he instructed. "We need to make sure it's safe first," Officer Mike added, his eyes scanning the dimly lit entryway. They advanced with careful, measured steps. The living room was empty, the morning light casting long, ominous shadows across the furniture. Jamal's eyes darted around, desperately searching for any sign of his mother. As they neared the kitchen, Officer Mike raised his hand, signaling them to halt. He had spotted something on the floor just beyond the door. There, sprawled on the cold tile floor, was Angela. Her body lay in an unnatural position, her face pale and ashen. A wave of dread swept over the officers at the sight. Jamal's eyes widened in horror. "Mom!" he screamed, shoving past the officers to reach Angela's side. He fell to his knees beside her, his hands trembling as he reached out to touch her arm. "Mom, can you hear me? Please wake up." Angela didn't respond. Her eyes remained shut, her chest rising and falling with shallow breaths. Jamal's voice grew increasingly frantic. "Mom, please, it's me, Jamal. You have to wake up." Officer Mike quickly knelt beside Angela, checking her pulse. "It's weak, but it's there," he reported, his voice tight with concern. "We need to get her to the hospital, fast." Jamal's gaze was fixed on his mother's face, tears streaming down his cheeks as he grasped her hand, silently willing her to open her eyes. "Mom, please," he whispered, his voice breaking with emotion. "I need you. You can't leave me." The officers exchanged worried glances over Jamal's head. They understood the urgency of the situation but also recognized the boy's desperate need to be close to his mother. Jamal hovered nearby, his hands shaking as he watched the officers tend to Angela. Tears welled in his eyes, threatening to spill over. The officers quickly assessed the scene, their trained eyes evaluating the situation. Officer John knelt next to Angela, checking her vital signs, while Officer Mike grabbed his radio. "This isn't a crime scene," Officer John said, his voice laced with concern. "It's a medical emergency. She's completely exhausted." The realization hit them like a wave. Jamal's desperate plea at the station hadn't been about a crime. It was a cry for help to save his mother. Angela's body had finally given out from overwork and neglect. Officer Mike's eyes widened with understanding. "My God," he murmured. "She worked herself to the bone." Without hesitation, Officer Mike spoke into his radio. "Dispatch, this is Officer Mike. We need an ambulance at 1542 Maple Street immediately. We have an unconscious woman, possible collapse due to extreme exhaustion." As Officer Mike relayed the details to dispatch, Officer John turned to Jamal, still clinging to his mother's hand, tears streaming down his face. "You did the right thing coming to us," Officer John said gently, placing a comforting hand on the boy's shoulder. "Help is on the way." Jamal looked up at the officer, his eyes filled with a mix of fear and hope. "Is she going to be okay?" "We're doing everything we can," Officer John reassured him. "The paramedics will be here soon." The minutes seemed to stretch endlessly as they waited for help. Jamal couldn't tear his gaze from his mother's pale face. He reached out and gently squeezed her hand. "Mom, please wake up," he begged, his voice choked with emotion. Officer John placed a reassuring hand on Jamal's shoulder. "You're a brave boy. Getting help so quickly might have saved your mother's life." Jamal nodded, unable to speak past the lump in his throat. He felt a tumult of relief and fear overwhelming him. Relief that help was on the way, but fear of what might come next. The ambulance screeched to a halt outside Jamal's house, its flashing lights painting the quiet street in frantic red and white. Two paramedics burst through the front door, their movements swift and purposeful, as they prepared to attend to Angela and provide the urgent care she so desperately needed. They rushed into the kitchen, where Angela lay motionless on the floor. Jamal stood paralyzed, his eyes wide with shock as he watched the paramedics work. Their voices were calm but urgent as they shouted medical terms he didn't understand. One paramedic placed an oxygen mask over Angela's face while the other checked her vital signs. "Her blood pressure is dangerously low," one of them said. "We need to stabilize her." Officer Mike gently placed a hand on Jamal's shoulder, guiding him a few steps back to give the paramedics more space. "They're doing everything they can for your mother," he said softly. Jamal nodded, unable to speak. His gaze never left his mother's pale face as the paramedics worked to stabilize her. They connected monitors and inserted N4, their movements quick and skilled. It felt like an eternity, though it was only a few minutes. Finally, one of the paramedics looked up. "We're ready to move her. Let's get her onto the stretcher carefully." They placed Angela onto the stretcher, securing her for the trip to the hospital. As they wheeled her out of the house, Officer John turned to Jamal. "Would you like to ride in the ambulance with your mother?" he asked gently. "I'll follow behind in the patrol car." Jamal climbed into the back of the ambulance, his legs trembling as he sat beside his mother. The paramedic behind them offered a reassuring smile. "We'll take good care of her," she said, adjusting one of the monitors. As the ambulance sped through the streets with its siren wailing, Jamal held his mother's hand tightly. The ride was a blur of flashing lights and sharp turns. His mind raced, trying to make sense of everything that had happened. He watched the paramedic closely, searching for any sign of hope on her face as she monitored Angela's vital signs. The automatic doors of the hospital slid open with a whoosh as the paramedics hurried Angela's stretcher through. Jamal stumbled behind, his bare feet tapping against the cold linoleum floor. The harsh fluorescent lights of the emergency room made him squint after the darkness of the night. A young boy, no older than 12, accompanied one of the paramedics. "Mother in her 30s, the paramedic called out. "Severe exhaustion and possible malnutrition." A team of doctors and nurses converged around Angela, their voices overlapping as they fired questions and commands at one another. Jamal tried to keep up, but a kindly-faced nurse gently ushered him away. "You need to wait outside, sweetheart," she said softly. "We'll take good care of your mother, I promise." Jamal found himself alone in the waiting area, the sounds of the emergency room fading into a distant hum. He sank into an uncomfortable plastic chair, his legs suddenly feeling like jelly. The events of the morning replayed in his mind. Finding Angela on the floor, rushing to the station, the frantic ambulance ride. It all felt like a nightmarish blur. Minutes ticked by, feeling like hours as Jamal's eyes darted between the clock on the wall and the double doors leading to the emergency room. Each time the doors swung open, his heart leapt with hope for news about his mother, only to deflate when the visitor wasn't who he was waiting for. He hugged his knees to his chest, trying to make himself as small as possible in the vast emptiness of the waiting room. Guilt gnawed at him, questioning why he hadn't noticed sooner how dire the situation had become, why he hadn't done something to help. After what seemed like an eternity, the doors opened once more. This time, a nurse in blue scrubs walked directly towards Jamal. Her face was kind but serious. "Are you Angela's son?" she asked gently. Jamal nodded, his throat too tight to speak. The nurse sat down beside him, her voice soft yet clear. "Your mother is suffering from extreme exhaustion and malnutrition," she explained. "She has been working herself too hard and hasn't been taking care of her own needs." Tears welled up in Jamal's eyes. He should have known, should have done something sooner. Minutes later, the automatic doors of the hospital slid open, and two uniformed officers entered the bustling emergency room. Their eyes scanned the waiting area until they spotted Jamal huddled in a plastic chair, his face etched with worry. Officer Mike and Officer John approached him, their expressions softening as they neared. "Hi, Jamal," Officer Mike said gently, crouching down to meet the boy's eyes. "How are you holding up?" Jamal looked up, his eyes red and weary. He shrugged, unable to find the words to express the turmoil inside him. Officer John pulled up a chair next to Jamal, while Officer Mike took a seat on the other side, forming a protective circle around the boy and shielding him from the chaos of the emergency room. "We wanted to check on you and your mom," Officer John said, his voice warm and reassuring. "Have the doctors told you anything?" Jamal nodded slowly. "They said she's very tired and hasn't been eating properly," he murmured, his voice barely audible. Officer Mike placed a comforting hand on Jamal's shoulder. "Jamal, there's something important you need to understand," he said, his tone gentle but firm. "What happened to your mother is not your fault." Jamal's head jerked up, his eyes wide with surprise and disbelief. Officer John leaned in, his voice filled with compassion. "Your mother loves you very much, Jamal. Sometimes when people love someone they push themselves too hard trying to take care of them. That's what your mother did." Jamal's voice cracked as he tried to speak. "I should have realized. I should have done something earlier." Officer Mike shook his head. "You're just a child, Jamal. It's not your responsibility to take care of your mother. You did the right thing by seeking help when you saw that something was wrong." As the officers continued to offer words of comfort and support, Jamal listened attentively. He wanted to believe them, to set aside the guilt that was gnawing at him, but the weight of responsibility still bore heavily on his young shoulders. As the sun began to filter through the hospital windows, casting a gentle glow across the sterile corridors, a nurse approached Jamal with a warm smile. "Your mother has been moved to a room now. You can go see her if you'd like," she said, her voice soothing and kind. Jamal's heart raced as he followed the nurse down the hallway. He had been waiting for this moment all night, but now that it was here, he felt a mix of relief and fear. What would he find when he entered that room? The nurse stopped at a door, gesturing for Jamal to enter. Taking a deep breath, he stepped inside. The room was quiet, save for the gentle beep of the machines. Angela lay in the hospital bed, her eyes closed and her face pale. She looked so small and fragile, so unlike the strong and tireless mother Jamal was used to seeing. Jamal's breath caught in his throat. Seeing his mother so vulnerable and weak was almost more than he could bear. He stood frozen for a moment, overwhelmed by the sight. Slowly, he moved to her bedside, reaching out to hold her hand, which rested on top of the blanket. Her skin felt cold against his palm, and he gave her a gentle squeeze. "Mama," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion, "I'm here." Angela's eyes fluttered open, and a weak smile spread across her face when she saw Jamal. "Hey baby," she murmured, her voice hoarse. Tears sprang to Jamal's eyes. He blinked them back, determined to stay strong for his mother. "How are you feeling?" he asked. "I'm okay," Angela replied, but Jamal could see the exhaustion in her eyes. He tightened his grip on her hand. "Mama, I promise I'm going to help you get better," he said with resolve. "And I'm going to make sure you never have to work so hard again. We'll figure it out together, okay?" Angela's eyes glistened with tears. "Oh, Jamal," she whispered, "you're such a good boy, but you don't need to worry about me. That's not your job." Jamal sat in the uncomfortable hospital chair, watching his mother's chest rise and fall with each breath. Angela had fallen asleep again, her body finally getting the rest it so desperately needed. As the rhythmic beeping of the machines filled the room, Jamal's mind replayed the events of the past few days. He remembered how tired Angela had looked that morning while making breakfast before her double shift. He recalled how she had stumbled in the kitchen, brushing off her exhaustion with a weak smile. The image of her lying motionless on the floor flashed through his mind, squeezing his heart with fear. For the first time, Jamal truly understood the weight of the sacrifices his mother had been making for him. All those long shifts, the endless hours of work, the skipped meals. Angela had pushed herself to the brink of collapse, all for the sake of giving him a better life. Tears welled up in Jamal's eyes as guilt surged through him. How had he not seen it before? How had he missed the signs of his mother's exhaustion? He had been so wrapped up in his own life, his school, his friends, that he hadn't fully grasped the toll it was taking on Angela. As he watched his mother sleep, Jamal made a silent vow to be more aware of Angela's needs from now on. He would ensure she took breaks, had proper meals, and got enough rest. He wouldn't let her push herself to the point of collapse again. But his thoughts didn't stop there. Jamal began to wonder about other families in similar situations. How many single parents were out there working hard for their children? How many kids like him were unaware of the sacrifices being made for them? A determination began to grow in Jamal's heart. He wanted to help others, to ensure no other family had to go through what he and Angela had experienced. Maybe he could start a support group at school or volunteer at a community center. There had to be a way to raise awareness and provide assistance to those who needed it most. Over the following days, Angela remained in the hospital, her body slowly regaining its strength. Jamal visited her every day after school, his backpack brimming with small gifts and stories from home. Each visit brought a glimmer of light back into Angela's tired eyes. On his first visit, Jamal handed her a hand-drawn card adorned with colorful hearts. The message inside made Angela's eyes well up with tears. "Get well soon, Mom. I love you more than you can imagine." Angela held the card close to her heart, feeling a warm surge of emotion. The next day, Jamal arrived with a small potted plant to brighten her room. He carefully placed it on the windowsill, explaining its significance with a shy smile. Angela's heart softened at her son's thoughtfulness. As the days passed, Jamal shared stories about what was happening at home and at school. He told Angela about how their neighbors had stepped in to help with meals and household chores, and how his teachers sent their best wishes. Each story made Angela feel a little stronger, buoyed by the knowledge that her community cared. The police officers who had helped that fateful night also came by to check in. Officer John arrived with a cheerful bouquet of daisies, while Officer Mike brought a stack of magazines to help pass the time. Their visits, though brief, were deeply meaningful, reminding Angela and Jamal that they were not alone. "You have a wonderful child here," Officer Mike said during one visit, affectionately ruffling Jamal's hair. "He's been incredibly brave through all of this." Angela reached out and grasped Jamal's hand, her eyes shining with pride and love. "I know," she said softly. "I'm so lucky to have him." As the days wore on, Jamal began to feel a growing sense of hope within him. He realized they weren't alone in their struggle. Help was available when they needed it, whether from kind neighbors, understanding teachers, or compassionate police officers. The world suddenly seemed a little brighter, a little kinder. As Angela's condition improved day by day, her hospital room became a hub of unexpected activity. Nurses and doctors, who had been so focused on their duties, now paused more frequently, not just to check her vitals but to offer words of encouragement. Their genuine concern deeply touched Angela. One afternoon, Officers John and Mike visited again, this time bringing a colorful get-well balloon. "The whole precinct is touched by your story, Angela," Officer Mike said with a warm smile. Angela felt a lump in her throat, overwhelmed by their kindness. News of Angela's situation had spread through the neighborhood, and soon a steady stream of familiar faces began to appear at her door. Mrs. Rodriguez from next door brought homemade chicken soup, its comforting aroma filling the room. Mr. Chin from the corner store stopped by with a beautiful orchid, explaining how it symbolized strength and resilience in his culture. Even Angela's colleagues from the hospital took time out of their busy schedules to visit, bringing stories of patience and sending their well wishes. Each visitor left Angela feeling more cherished and supported than she had ever imagined possible. Sitting in her hospital bed, surrounded by flowers, cards, and small gifts, Angela felt a profound shift in her perspective. She looked at Jamal, who had scarcely left her side, and saw the worry and love etched into his young face. She realized just how much her son and the community around her cared about her well-being. This realization prompted Angela to reflect deeply on her life. She had always put others first, working long hours and neglecting her own needs. But now, seeing the impact her collapse had on Jamal and feeling the outpouring of support from others, she understood that taking care of herself wasn't selfish, it was necessary. Angela began to contemplate the changes she needed to make. She thought about setting boundaries at work, asking for help when needed, and taking time for rest and self-care. For the next few days, Angela remained in the hospital, her body slowly regaining its strength. Jamal visited her every day after school, his backpack filled with small tokens of affection and stories from home. Each visit infused a little more light into Angela's weary eyes. On his first visit, Jamal handed her a handmade card decorated with colorful hearts. The message inside brought tears to Angela's eyes. "Get well soon, Mom. I love you more than you can imagine." Angela held the card close to her heart, feeling a warmth spread through her chest. The next day, Jamal arrived with a small potted plant to brighten her room. He carefully placed it on the windowsill, explaining its purpose with a shy smile. Angela was deeply touched by her son's thoughtfulness. As the days went by, Jamal shared stories about what was happening at home and school. He told Angela about how their neighbors had stepped in to help with meals and chores and how his teachers sent their best wishes. Each story made Angela feel a bit stronger, reassured by the support of her community. The police officers who had helped that fateful night also stopped by to check in. Officer John brought a cheerful bouquet of daisies, while Officer Mike came with a stack of magazines to help pass the time. Their visits, though brief, were meaningful, reminding Angela and Jamal that they were not alone. "You have a wonderful child here," Officer Mike said during one visit, affectionately ruffling Jamal's hair. "He's been incredibly brave through all of this." Angela reached out to hold Jamal's hand, her eyes shimmering with pride and love. "I know," she said softly. "I'm so lucky to have him." As the days wore on, Jamal began to feel a growing sense of hope within him. He realized they weren't alone in their struggle. Help was available when they needed it, whether from kind neighbors, understanding teachers, or compassionate police officers. The world suddenly seemed a little brighter, a little kinder. As Angela's condition improved day by day, her hospital room became a hub of unexpected activity. Nurses and doctors who had previously been focused solely on their duties, now paused more frequently, not just to check her vitals but to offer words of encouragement. Their genuine concern deeply touched Angela. One afternoon, Officers John and Mike visited again, this time bringing a colorful get-well balloon. "The whole precinct is touched by your story, Angela," Officer Mike said with a warm smile. Angela felt a lump in her throat, overwhelmed by their kindness. News of Angela's situation had spread through the neighborhood, and soon a steady stream of familiar faces began to appear at her door. Mrs. Rodriguez from next door brought homemade chicken soup, its comforting aroma filling the room. Mr. Chin from the corner store arrived with a beautiful orchid, explaining how it symbolized strength and resilience in his culture. Even Angela's colleagues from the hospital took time out of their busy schedules to visit, bringing stories of patience and sending their best wishes. Each visitor left Angela feeling more cherished and supported than she had ever imagined. Sitting in her hospital bed, surrounded by flowers, cards, and small gifts, Angela felt a profound shift in her perspective. She looked at Jamal, who had scarcely left her side, and saw the concern and love etched into his young face. She realized just how much her son and the community around her cared about her well-being. This realization prompted Angela to reflect deeply on her life. The idea of putting herself first felt strange and almost uncomfortable, but she knew it was essential for her well-being and Jamal's. As the afternoon sun cast a warm glow through the hospital room window, Angela and Jamal found themselves alone for the first time since her collapse. The room was quiet except for the soft hum of medical equipment. Angela patted the edge of the bed, inviting Jamal to sit closer. "Jamal, dear," Angela began, her voice gentle and filled with emotion, "I think it's time we talk about what happened." Jamal nodded, tears filling his eyes. "Mom, I was so scared," he whispered, his voice trembling. "I thought I was going to lose you." Angela reached out and took Jamal's hand, squeezing it gently. "I'm so sorry, sweetheart. I never wanted you to go through this." She paused, taking a deep breath. "I was so focused on making sure you had everything you needed, food, clothes, a roof over your head, that I forgot to take care of myself." Jamal looked at his mother with a mixture of love and concern. "But Mom, I need you more than anything. I want you to be healthy and happy." Angela felt a tear roll down her cheek. "Oh, Jamal, you're so wise for your age. You're right, and I see now that in working so hard to care for you, I didn't realize how much I was neglecting my own health. I tried to tell you," Jamal said softly. "I noticed how tired you were, but you always said you were fine." Angela nodded, a look of regret crossing her face. "I know, dear. I thought I had to be strong all the time, but that wasn't fair to either of us." They sat in silence for a moment, both processing the weight of their words. Then Jamal spoke, his voice filled with determination. "We need to find a better way. Mom, I want to help more at home and maybe you can work less." Angela smiled, feeling a surge of pride for her considerate son. "That's a great idea, Jamal. We'll figure this out together. I promise I'll start taking better care of myself, and we'll find a balance that works for both of us." Jamal leaned in and gently hugged his mother, being careful of her 4 lines. "I love you, Mom," he whispered. "I love you too, baby," Angela replied, holding her son close, more than he could ever know. When Angela and Jamal walked through the front door of their home, a wave of emotion washed over them. The house seemed different now, as if the very walls held a newfound understanding of the precious life they shared. "Welcome home, Mom," Jamal said softly, his arms supporting Angela as they entered. Angela took a deep breath, inhaling the familiar scent of home. "It's good to be back," she replied, her voice filled with gratitude. Jamal guided his mother to the living room sofa, helping her sit gently. "Let me make you comfortable," he said, his eyes scanning the room for anything she might need. Angela watched her son with a mixture of pride and love. "Jamal, you don't need to worry about me," she said, though her words held no real protest. "I want to, Mom," Jamal insisted, arranging pillows behind her back and draping a soft blanket over her legs. "You always took care of me, now it's my turn to help." As Jamal moved around the room, ensuring everything was just right, Angela felt a lump form in her throat. She realized how much she had underestimated her son's strength and maturity. Once he was satisfied that Angela was comfortable, Jamal sat beside her, his voice serious. "We need to talk about how things will be different now." Angela nodded, reaching out to take her son's hand. "You're right, dear. Things need to change." "I want to help more at home," Jamal said, meeting his mother's gaze. "And maybe you could work less. I know we need the money, but your health is more important." Angela felt tears welling in her eyes. "Oh, Jamal," she whispered, "you're so thoughtful. Yes, I think that's a good idea. I promise I'll start taking better care of myself." They shared a comfortable silence for a moment, both contemplating the changes ahead. Then Angela spoke again, her voice filled with resolve. "We'll figure this out together, dear. I'll talk to my boss about reducing my hours, and we can make a plan for sharing the household chores." Jamal nodded eagerly. "I can help with grocery shopping and cooking sometimes too. I want to learn to make healthy meals for both of us." Angela smiled, warmth spreading through her chest. "That sounds wonderful, Jamal. We'll support each other every step of the way." As they continued to talk, making plans and sharing ideas, the house seemed to come alive around them. It was no longer just a place they lived but a home filled with love, understanding, and a renewed appreciation for each other. As days passed, news of the Angeles situation began to ripple through the neighborhood like a gentle breeze. What started as whispers among concerned neighbors soon blossomed into a chorus of support and compassion. On a sunny afternoon, while Angela was resting on the porch, she noticed Mrs. Thompson approaching from across the street, carrying a covered dish. The elderly woman's face was etched with concern as she climbed the steps. "Angela, dear," Mrs. Thompson called out, her voice warm and kind. "I heard about what happened. I brought you a casserole." Angela's eyes widened in surprise. Although she and Mrs. Thompson had exchanged polite nods over the years, they had never truly connected. "That's very kind of you," Angela said, genuinely touched. As Mrs. Thompson set the dish down, she patted Angela's hand. We're here for you, dear. Don't hesitate to ask if you need anything. Before Angela could fully process this unexpected kindness, she spotted Mr. Rodriguez, the local market owner, walking up her driveway. In his arms was a bag full of fresh fruits and vegetables. "Ms. Angela," he called out with a warm smile, "I brought you some healthy treats on the house, of course." Angela felt tears well up in her eyes. "Mr. Rodriguez, I don't know what to say." He waved her off. "Thank you is not necessary. This is what neighbors do, we take care of each other." Throughout the week, more neighbors stopped by. Some brought food, others offered to mow the lawn or help with household chores. The Patel family next door even offered to tutor Jamal in math, so Angela wouldn't have to worry about his studies. Each act of kindness overwhelmed Angela with gratitude. She had always seen herself as the caregiver, someone who helped others. Accepting help felt foreign at first, but over the days she began to understand the beauty of community support. One evening, as Angela and Jamal sat on the porch swing watching the sunset, she turned to her son with tears in her eyes. "You know, Jamal," she said softly, "I always thought I had to do everything on my own. But these past few days have shown me that there's no shame in depending on others." Jamal nodded, squeezing his mother's hand. "We're not alone, Mom. We have an entire neighborhood backing us." Angela smiled, feeling a weight lift from her shoulders. She realized that asking for help wasn't a sign of weakness but a way to strengthen the bonds of community. As the sky turned a soft pink, Angela made a silent vow to herself to be more open to receiving help and to return the kindness she had been shown. As weeks turned into months, Angela began making significant changes in her daily routine. She recognized that taking care of herself was not selfish but essential for her well-being and Jamal's. One sunny morning, Angela woke earlier than usual. Instead of rushing to make breakfast, she laced up her sneakers and took a short walk around the block. The fresh morning air filled her lungs, and she felt a calmness wash over her. When she returned home, Jamal was already up, preparing a simple breakfast of oatmeal and fruit. "Good morning, Mom," Jamal said with a smile. "How was your walk?" Angela's face lit up. "It was wonderful, dear. I feel so refreshed." As they sat down to eat, Angela noticed the change in her morning routine. There was no rush, no stress. They chatted and laughed, savoring each other's company. Before heading to work, Angela prepared a healthy lunch and promised Jamal she would take regular breaks during her hospital shift. Her coworkers noticed the change in her demeanor. She seemed more relaxed, more focused. Instead of working through her lunch breaks as she had before, Angela now ate her packed lunch in the hospital garden, closing her eyes and soaking up the sun's warmth. That evening, when Angela returned home, Jamal had a surprise waiting for her. He had prepared a simple dinner and set up a cozy corner in the living room with soft pillows and blankets. "I thought we could have a relaxing night together," Jamal said, his eyes shining with pride. Angela's heart swelled with love. "That sounds perfect, dear," she replied, feeling an overwhelming sense of warmth and contentment. As they sat together, savoring their meal and each other's company, Angela felt a profound shift within herself. She had more energy, felt less stressed, and most importantly, was fully present with her son. "You know, Jamal," Angela said softly, her voice trembling with emotion, "I'm so grateful for your support. You've reminded me every day of how crucial it is to take care of myself." Jamal smiled, reaching out to hold his mother's hand. "We're in this together, Mom. Your health and happiness matter to me just as much as mine matter to you." As the weeks passed, Jamal took on more responsibilities at home. He started doing additional chores like washing clothes and preparing simple meals. This not only lightened Angela's load but also gave Jamal a sense of purpose and responsibility. One day, while helping Angela fold laundry, Jamal's eyes lit up with excitement. "Mom," he said, "I've been thinking. There might be other kids out there in the same situation as us." Angela paused, holding a shirt in her hands. "What do you mean, dear?" Jamal explained eagerly, "I don't think I'm the only kid with a parent who works really hard. Maybe I could start a group at school for kids like me." Angela's heart swelled with pride at her son's thoughtfulness. "That's a wonderful idea, Jamal. I'm sure there are many kids who could benefit from that kind of support." Encouraged by his mother's approval, Jamal approached his school counselor the next day. With her help, he established a small support group for students whose parents were overwhelmed. The first meeting took place in a quiet classroom after school. Jamal was nervous as he watched 5 other students, each with a mix of curiosity and uncertainty, take their seats. "Hi everyone," Jamal began, his voice slightly shaky. "I'm Jamal and I started this group because my mom works really hard, sometimes too hard. I thought maybe we could share our experiences and find ways to support our families." As the students began to share, Jamal felt a weight lift off his shoulders. He realized he wasn't alone. Each story resonated with him, from Sarah, whose single father worked 2 jobs, to Miguel, whose parents ran a small business. They exchanged ideas on how to help at home, such as creating chore charts and learning to cook simple meals. Jamal talked about the importance of encouraging parents to take breaks and prioritize self-care. "My mom started taking morning walks," Jamal shared, "and it's made a huge difference in her mood and energy." The group nodded, jotting down notes as the meeting concluded. Jamal felt a deep sense of accomplishment. He had created a space where children like him could find support and understanding. As he walked home that day, he felt lighter, comforted by the knowledge that he was making a difference, not only for his mother but for other families as well. Inspired by her own recovery and the support she had received, Angela felt a strong desire to give back to her community. She couldn't shake the feeling that there were others out there, just like her, struggling to the brink of exhaustion without recognizing the toll it was taking. One evening, while finishing dinner with Jamal at the kitchen table, Angela shared her idea. "I've been thinking," she began, her eyes sparkling with enthusiasm, "about organizing some wellness workshops for our neighbors." Jamal looked up from his plate, intrigued. "What kind of workshops, Mom?" Angela's smile was warm and inviting. "I want to teach people about the importance of self-care and how to recognize the signs of burnout before it's too late. I don't want anyone else to go through what we've been through." With Jamal's enthusiastic support, Angela began planning her first workshop. She reached out to local community centers and eventually secured a small meeting room at the neighborhood library. Angela spent her nights researching and preparing, pouring her heart into creating a program that would truly help others. The day of the first workshop arrived, and Angela was a whirlwind of nervousness and excitement as she set up the room. To her surprise and delight, more people showed up than she had anticipated. As she began to speak, sharing her personal journey and the lessons she had learned, Angela could see her words resonating with the attendees. A young mother named Maria raised her hand. "How do you find time to take care of yourself when there's always so much to do?" she asked, her voice tinged with frustration. Angela nodded in understanding. "It's not easy," she admitted, "but we have to remember that self-care isn't selfish. It's necessary. Start small, even if it's just 5 minutes a day doing something you love." As the workshop continued, Angela saw the impact of her words. People were nodding, taking notes, and sharing their own experiences. By the end of the session, there was a palpable sense of hope and determination in the room. The workshop quickly gained popularity, with more and more people signing up for each session. Angela found herself expanding the program to cover topics like stress management, healthy eating on a budget, and the importance of sleep. As news of Angela's workshop spread, the community began to recognize the value of mutual support. Inspired by Angela's story and the lessons she shared, a group of neighbors came together to establish the Helping Hands program. The program's goal was simple yet powerful: to create a support network where no one had to struggle alone. Neighbors started checking in on each other, offering help with tasks like grocery shopping, gardening, or just lending a listening ear. Sarah, the young mother from Angela's first workshop, became one of the program's most enthusiastic supporters. She organized a meal delivery schedule for families going through tough times. "It's amazing how a homemade meal can lift someone's spirits," she said with a warm smile. The Helping Hands program also included regular educational sessions on various topics, from stress management techniques to tips for healthy living on a budget. Local experts volunteered to lead these sessions, sharing their knowledge with the community. One particularly popular session focused on the importance of sleep. Dr. Thompson, a local sleep specialist, explained that adequate rest is crucial for our physical and mental health. It's not a luxury but a necessity. As the program grew, so did the sense of connection within the community. People who had once been strangers now greeted each other by name on the streets. The atmosphere in the neighborhood transformed into one of warmth and support. Angela watched with pride as the community embraced the spirit of mutual aid. She often reflected on her own experiences and how different things might have been if such a program had existed earlier. It's not just about preventing burnout, she realized, but about building a community where everyone feels valued and supported. The impact of the Helping Hands program extended beyond individual well-being. As neighbors looked out for each other, the overall health of the community improved. People reported feeling less stressed, more connected, and better equipped to handle life's challenges. As weeks went by, Angela's life began to change in ways she had never imagined. The lessons she learned from her struggles and the support from her community helped her find a better balance between work and personal life. She no longer pushed herself to exhaustion. Instead, she learned to prioritize her well-being alongside her responsibilities. Angela started taking regular breaks during her hospital shifts, using these moments to recharge and refocus. She also made it a point to eat nutritious meals and get enough sleep each night. These small changes made a significant difference in her energy levels and overall mood. The most significant improvement, however, was in Angela's relationship with Jamal. Their already strong bond, tested by their shared experience, had emerged even stronger. Angela realized that being present for her son was just as important as providing for him financially. Angela began attending Jamal's school events, cheering him on from the sidelines during his soccer games and beaming with pride at his science fair presentations. What had once been rare occurrences became regular, cherished moments for both of them. Their evenings at home took on a new rhythm. Instead of Angela collapsing on the couch, exhausted from her long shifts, they now spent quality time together. They cooked meals side by side, laughing as they experimented with new recipes. They played board games, each one trying to outdo the other in friendly competition. Sometimes they simply sat together, talking about their day and sharing their dreams and thoughts. Jamal felt the change deeply. No longer did he constantly worry about his mother's health or carry the weight of responsibility on his young shoulders. Instead, he felt secure and supported, knowing that Angela was there for him not just physically but emotionally as well. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Jamal turned to his mother. Her face, once etched with fatigue, now glowed with contentment. "Mom," he said softly, "I'm so glad you're doing better, and I'm happy that we get to spend more time together." Angela wrapped her arm around Jamal's shoulders, pulling him close. "Me too, dear," she replied, her voice thick with emotion. "I'm sorry it took such a scare for me to realize what really matters. But I promise I'll always be here for you." As the sun rose on a beautiful Saturday morning, the community gathered at the hospital auditorium. The room buzzed with excitement and warmth as neighbors, friends, and hospital staff filled the seats. At the front of the room stood Angela and Jamal, their faces radiant with newfound strength and gratitude. Angela approached the microphone, her voice steady but laden with emotion. "Thank you all for being here today," she began. "A few months ago, I thought I had to bear the weight of the world alone. I pushed myself to the limit, believing that's what it meant to be a good mother and nurse. But I was wrong." She paused, her eyes brimming with tears as she looked at Jamal. "My son's courage and love saved my life, and all of you with your kindness and support helped us heal and grow stronger." Angela continued, sharing her story and the dangers of overworking and the critical importance of self-care. She spoke about the lessons she had learned and how they transformed her life and her relationship with Jamal. "We don't have to face our struggles alone," Angela said, her voice filled with conviction. "We have each other. Let's promise to take care of one another, offer help when we can, and ask for it when we need it." The audience nodded in agreement, many wiping away tears. As Angela finished speaking, the room erupted in applause. Jamal stood and joined his mother, enveloping her in a tight embrace. The hospital administrator then took the stage, praising Jamal for his quick thinking and bravery. "This young man's actions remind us all of the power of love and community," she said, presenting Jamal with a certificate of heroism. Jamal, usually shy, stood tall as he accepted the certificate. He looked out at the crowd, seeing not strangers but a community that had come together to support him and his mother. For the first time in a long while, he felt truly safe and understood. As the ceremony ended, people gathered around Angela and Jamal, offering hugs, words of encouragement, and promises of support. The atmosphere was charged with a sense of renewal and a commitment to building a stronger, more supportive community. If you enjoyed this story, leave a comment below, give it a thumbs up, and share it with your friends. See you in the next video.